This particular night was different than the rest of the week. As I sat at the edge of my bed and I saw the glistening of the lightning flicker off my mom's face, I realized that a conversation of great importance was about to take place. She softly leaned into my ear and whispered to me, "You are not like the others. You have the power to predict the future, and with this power is going to come great turmoil throughout the rest of your life." What's going on, guys? Carter here with Edge Mindset. I've got a bit of a yappy predictive future video here where I am going to pretend like I know a thing or two about what's going to happen when the reality is I don't. We're going to be talking about the ZBT Ultratech, what I think is going to happen for this line, for the ZBT concept. It's pretty wild. It's a pretty stark prediction. So take this with a huge grain of salt. I really have no idea what I'm talking about. Nothing in what I'm about to say is informed by any insider information. I have no data plug within the company. This is pure speculation. It's backed by a little bit of logical thinking, things I've seen in the past, but it's mostly me predicting what's going to happen with these ZBT knives. Spoiler alert, I don't think these are going to replace the main line of knives across the board. So here is why I think that, and I touched on this on, a review of this knife or something I did with this knife. I don't remember, unboxing or review. I forget what all I've done with this knife. Not that much, actually. I kind of made this prediction because this one had a little bit of blade play when I opened it. It actually had some misfiring when I first opened it, and then it immediately broke in, and then it had a little bit of side to side. And while I was testing that side to side is where I got this little guy right here. And in trying to adjust it, taking this apart, taking out the little set screw, trying to adjust things, I kind of realized there is some potential issues with taking a knife like this into the production level. I think there's reasons why zero blade play OTFs have remained in the custom realm. And what I believe, I'm going to be saying that a lot, allegedly, what I believe, what I think, because once again, this is not being talked about on any kind of actual level of authority. This is purely speculation on my part based on what I've seen. And, I have some general knowledge of how businesses work and some of these decisions and things. I've been around the block. I've got a few candles on my cake, however you want to put it. During that video, I kind of realized there's quite a bit of overhead with these knives. And I understand, whenever you're going to production with a new knife, a new offering, you've got to understand what your return rate's going to be, what it's going to look like if the knife stops working, how many people are going to return it, send it in for work, and things like that. And it's a delicate balance against the price that you're offering, right? You've got to be able to cover that service. Now, the reason that zero tolerance blades have remained in kind of the small batch custom world at higher than normal prices is twofold. One, that limits the exposure of the type of person that are getting their hands on the knife, right? If you're buying a Hawk Deadlock or what's that one called, that custom, the Shriek? I forget what it is. There's a few custom makers who do zero play style OTFs. But the main one we're going to talk about is probably the Hawk Deadlock. By offering limited numbers at higher expenses, you're limiting the exposure to the type of person that's buying the knife, right? Your everyman, everyday Joe, blue collar, white collar, working man is not going to be getting those knives that much. I mean, obviously they exist. They do. I am. I'm a regular working guy and I get those knives. I also run a YouTube channel. But it's not going to get the exposure that a full production knife like this Microtech here, which is the Gen 3 Combat Troodon. This does not have ZBT or any zero tolerance mechanism inside. It's actually got, a decent amount of play in the blade, which means there's a lot more leeway in terms of this thing functioning. So by limiting the exposure to the type of person getting your knife, it's a little easier to manage those expectations, right? Somebody buying a Hawk Deadlock for $2,000, $3,000 are going to be a different type of person than somebody buying a zero tolerance, a ZBT Ultratech for $370, right? different category of person. You're also going to sell way more of these than something like a deadlock, right? And so the margins aren't as high on this knife, meaning you have to sell more units in order to make a profit. Whereas the Hawk Deadlock, your margins can be higher. You're making way more money per item, right? It's $2,000. But because you have higher margins, you can take more care in hand fitting that particular knife, making sure it is dialed in perfectly before it goes out. If there's any issues, hey, send it in, we'll fix it. When you get into kind of the higher volume production knife category, things extrapolate, right? Your instances of issues with the ZBT and people wanting to send it in go through the roof, and then that's expensive, right? And then you have to make decisions. What exactly do you cover? You know, if somebody just doesn't like the way the knife is dialed in and they don't want to adjust it themselves, is that a free service? You charge them $20? You know, what do you do there? Because I guarantee you that's happening a lot. I guarantee you a lot of people are getting this knife and it's got minor play and they're like, hey, I want this thing to be zero play. I'm not savvy enough to take it apart and adjust it myself, so I want to send it in. Do you charge for that? Do you do that as a free service? Conversely, you know, anything that's this precise inside, right? Because really, and we'll talk about this. I want to do a takedown of this knife. It's been done a lot, right? But there's some things I want to talk about in terms of how this works and how precise this is. With a regular traditional OTF, see this play right here? That gives you latitude that when this thing fires, it can stretch, right? It stretches up a little bit, and that gives that gate plenty of time to come over. It can fully engage, and then it seats. With this guy, it has to be almost an exact match. Like, it comes up and hits the stop, and then that gate has to engage sufficient enough to lock out the knife, because you can see you can't pull this blade out. That's just my fingers moving. It does not stretch in and out at all. Now, the cone mechanism does give you a little bit of flex there, but not nearly as much as kind of a traditional OTF does in order for it to have that lockout mechanism. So as such, it really has to be dialed in pretty precise, or else you're going to get issues where it doesn't fully lock out, which is happening on these knives. Now, I'm not going to say a lot because it's not happening more than I would expect. In fact, I am very surprised at how well this launch has gone. Yes, there's people that have issues. Yes, there's knives that went out that weren't tuned as well as they should be and things like that. But for the most part, executing something like this on a production level is truly outstanding and pretty crazy to try to do. I'm guessing this was a bit of an experiment to see how things go, right? How viable is this ZBT mechanism, and what is the appetite for something like this to spread into the other lines? Another thing that I want to point out before I forget that you need to be aware of with these knives, as a buyer, somebody especially buying on the secondary market pre-owned, it adds more complexity into it, because the knife can look pristine, no marks, nothing like that, no damage. You buy the thing, maybe it's got a little bit of wiggle, or maybe it doesn't lock out. You take it apart and you find out that the set screw's been lost, stripped, things have been Loctited. If you take the little disc in there, and we'll talk about this in my breakdown, and don't take out the set screw and just start grinding, it is going to destroy that set screw. Like, there's a lot of things that could be messed up in this knife that isn't visible in a photo or a video. That adds just another layer of skepticism on these knives, especially buying on the secondary market. Now, that doesn't really directly have to do with Microtech, just more as a side note on this kind of knife. Now, once again, when you're talking about more expensive knives like the Hawk Deadlock, and I realize that this is actually very expensive for many of us, but I'm talking in relative terms to other things available, it's a little bit easier to be more demanding on some of this information and videos and close-up pictures, and people are more willing to take more care. You're also dealing with a higher caliber of owner, so if you don't like the knife, you're more likely to be able to rectify that with the seller and say, hey, you said it was X, it looks like it's Y, I want to send it back and my money back. You're more likely to be successful than something that's more mass produced. I'm not saying you can't, I'm just saying when you're dealing with a knife like this. It's just different. It's a different ball game, and it's very bold of Microtech to offer something like ZBT in a production knife like this. So here's my prediction, which I've kind of touched on in the midst of all my rambling. I don't think this is going to be, I could be absolutely wrong. I don't think this is going to be the way forward for Gen 3. I either see, and this is something I definitely can't really speak to because it could go either way. I either see this not being successful in terms of too much overhead for Microtech, where they can't afford to manage all of these knives coming back in for various things, as well as the backlash for them refusing to do certain things. No shade on them. Like it's business, like it's managing, tweaking these knives, adjusting these knives. It costs money, shipping, man hours, all kinds of things. Not to mention they get it and you actually screwed it up. They've got to mitigate that. They've got to manage that. They've got to send emails back and forth. There's a lot of costs there. I would imagine they've upped their customer service support at launch of this, knowing that they were going to get a higher volume. Now, depending on how bad that is, maybe this ends up being a total one-off thing where they reintroduce the Ultratech Classic, which is the old school one. And then this one will slowly be phased out, and it'll kind of just be a little blip. I've talked about this before. They released an Ultratech 2 a few years ago that was supposed to be kind of like this, a redesign of the Ultratech. But it didn't have any new mechanism or anything. It was a visual change with the body. It had like these big rib patterns in here. They made a few other changes and things like that. It just went away. It was supposed to be the Ultratech 2. It was introduced as the signature line, I believe. I'm assuming it was a little bit of a test release to see how people liked it. And I guess they didn't like it enough because it just went away and disappeared. I think they did the same thing with the UTX 80. They had a UTX 80 too. And it just never caught on, and it never turned into the main knife. Now, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe that was their intention all along. Maybe it was never meant to ever potentially be a replacement. But it seemed like to me that's what the goal was. I could see that happening with this as well. So either it's a complete failure and it goes away, and the ZBTs are a cool little blip and they become super collectible because they only released a handful of versions and then it kind of went away. Or if it's more of a medium level thing where it's not completely catastrophic in terms of being able to support these knives, maybe this just becomes a signature release, right? Where they do more limited numbers of it. It's a signature series. It costs a little bit more. It's the Combat Troodon ZBT, but then they continue to release the regular Combat Troodon. I think we're in the middle of a testing ground for this. I know kind of the way Microtech and companies think, and I think they're trying to feel out what this looks like based on overhead cost of returns and managing these things, issues people are having, as well as how excited and how many units they're selling of the ZBT. Outside looking in, I'm not 100% sure how excited people are with this knife. I've heard both. Some people are blown away by it. Other people are like, out of all the things that Microtech has done, the zero blade play thing is the least exciting to me. I don't really care. Some people actually are very skeptical of this locking mechanism. They feel that something with a little bit more play and looser tolerances is going to lead to a more reliable knife. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. So I am curious to see, once the hype of like the initial, hey, we released a new thing wears off, what does the future hold for the ZBT line? Comment down below. Do you agree with anything I'm saying? Do you disagree with what I'm saying? Do you think there's any sort of basis for my prediction here? Or do you think nope, they're just going to keep releasing the ZBT and then that is going to be the end of it? Comment down below. I appreciate everybody. I couldn't do this without you. I wouldn't want to anyways. I will catch you on the next video. I'm out.